Calling all veterinary professionals. Are you ready to upgrade your skills without breaking the bank? Look no further than VETgirl's tantalizing offer. Access our full on-demand library of webinars and resources completely free for 14 days. No need to fret about whipping out your trusty credit card. This offer is too good to pass up. You'll be wagging your tail with newfound knowledge in no time. Take advantage of this perfect opportunity and unleash your potential with VETgirl. Hi, VETgirl here today, and super excited to speak with Emily Riemer. You guys have heard her on a podcast before where we talked about the importance of trying to reduce burnout because we have so much burnout in veterinary medicine. So if you haven't listened to that podcast, you definitely want to check that out. Today, I'm really excited to talk with Emily about work-life balance. We talk about this all the time, but tune in to get some real hints on what we can do. Emily, thank you so much for joining us again for today's VETgirl podcast.
I am excited. It's good to see you again.
Thank you so much. Now, just so our audience knows a little bit about who you are, do you mind just giving us some background? Who are you? What have you done in a previous life? What do you do now? And talk to us about work-life balance.
Yes. Okay. So my name is Emily Riemer. I am a burnout recovery specialist, and I work with medical professionals to address really the root causes of burnout and then work on a realistic, manageable plan for addressing it that fits within their life. So I'm a Duke certified health coach, and this is a relatively new change for me. I was a TV news anchor for about 20 years. I started in Albany, New York, went to Columbus, Ohio, made it to Boston, Massachusetts, where I was a medical reporter. I was the evening anchor. And the truth is I burned out. The COVID-19 pandemic, I think, really clarified some things for me. And I realized that I had been pushing really hard for a really long time. I'd been maybe ignoring some of the pieces that would have helped me keep going, self-care kind of pieces. And when the pandemic hit, that was kind of it for me. I just couldn't separate anymore what I was doing at work from what I was doing at home. And I realized that I needed to make a big change. So for me personally, after a lot of reflection, talking with family, with my therapist, that was a decision I made to walk away from news. It was not easy, but it was the right choice for me. And so as I was kind of going through my own burnout recovery journey, I was trying to figure out, what does my next chapter look like? And I remembered a story I had done about health coaches who were working with the American Health Association. And I thought, wait a second, a health coach, that's helping people. Journalism is, that's why I got into it. I wanted to help people. And this felt like being able to help people in a much more personal way, being able to really help people change their lives for the better, much the same way that I had. And so that's what I do now. So I work with medical professionals to try to figure out, where could we make changes that would have the biggest impact so that if you want to stay in your job, you do, and you feel good about it. If it's time to leave, we'll talk through that too and figure out what it looks like. But I help them figure out what is going to work for them so they feel good both at work and at home.
Awesome. Love it. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, because we're going to talk about work-life balance, and some people have different semantic terms for this. I don't care what you call it, but ultimately, why is achieving work-life balance so crucial for veterinary professionals, especially in emotionally and physically taxing fields?
Right. So I think you're totally right. There's this idea of work-life balance, and maybe it's non-existent. Maybe there is no such thing as balance. Maybe it is about finding the right proportions that work for you and making sure that when you are at work, you're feeling really good about it. I feel really strongly that if you want to continue working in a field like veterinary medicine, where you're a giver, right? Like you want to help people, you have to create boundaries. Those are for your protection. They are your seatbelt. And as much as it may feel weird to you to say no, to pull back, if you don't set boundaries, if you don't know what your limits are, you will not show up like you want to for your patients. You won't show up the way you want to for your staff, for your clinic. If you're burned out, you are not the provider you want to be. And I know that that's what you want. you want to show up and be the person that someone can look to for guidance and support. And so really work-life balance, life-work balance, proportions, whatever it is, it starts with a mindset that boundaries and limits really matter, especially in fields where you are giving 100% every day.
Can you give an example of boundaries? Because I think sometimes it's hard for us to create them when we don't know tangibly what to say.
Right. Okay. So for an example, I worked with a university professor who work was taking over his life. Right. And I said, we gotta set some boundaries here. What his problem was when people asked him for something, he couldn't say no. And so as a result, his schedule was packed. He had stuff all over the place, no time for him, and he felt resentful. He felt pulled in all directions. And so what we did was we started by, instead of saying no, right? Instead of switching it to no, if someone asked him for something, he would say, I'm going to check my schedule and I'll get back to you. So he created a boundary, which was space, by not having to answer in the moment, by giving himself the space to actually think about it for a second. He was able to decide whether he wanted to do this, had the capacity, the time, the resources to do it, or if he really didn't. But that boundary, simply by saying, I'm going to check my calendar, I'll let you know later today, that helped him make a more conscious choice about whether or not this request actually fit with him. And so obviously that's going to be a little bit different for veterinary medicine, but I think the idea is that you would create space so that you can make sure that whatever you're deciding to do aligns with who you want to be as a provider and the kind of care you want to give. Does that make sense?
I love it. Thank you so much. That's super helpful. Now I know I will say that I'm the queen of boundaries because I love having boundaries, but I didn't learn this until my late 40s. And sometimes it could be personal, where you can set the boundaries when you are getting together for family reunions. And when someone starts to talk politics, you can say, hey, I hope you don't mind. For New Year's resolutions, I've decided to set boundaries where I don't talk politics unless you're quoting from a .edu resource or website. But I just ask that you respect my boundaries and that I don't want to talk about it. Another one for me career-wise was learning to say no. And that was really hard because we always are so giving in the veterinary field. And again, I didn't learn this till my early 40s. But I would ask myself, and I was taught this by a fellow colleague, Dr. Laura, who said she would ask herself 3 questions before she said yes to something. 1, does it directly benefit me? In other words, is it going to help my CV? Is it going to help me in this new job? And it feels selfish to say that, but you can say, is this going to directly benefit me? 2, is this going to spark joy? If you take on this project, say it's you're going to write a book chapter, are you going to hold up the book and be like, I wrote this, it sparked joy, it's so amazing? Then yes, say yes. And then the third thing was, if I say yes to this, is it going to increase my stress to yes ratio? If I say yes to writing this book chapter, which I don't get paid for, but I get a free $200 book, but it took me 100 hours to write this book chapter at, let's just say, an average rate of $50 an hour, I could have bought like 100 books for that price for my hourly rate. And it would have totally stressed me out to say yes to this project. So for me, part of my boundaries for saying no are asking myself those 3 questions. And sometimes it's hard to reject them out front, but I love that example where that professor was automatically trained to say, hey, can I get back to you? And that's what I would say. Yeah. I'd say, hey, can I get back to you? And then I would pre-schedule the email that says, thanks so much for asking me to write this book chapter. Don't have the bandwidth, but thanks. That's it. And then I'd schedule it for the next day. So again, when in doubt, sometimes it feels selfish to have these boundaries, but so important. Now, you had brought up having the mindset shift that needs to happen.
Right.
Do you mind expanding on that? Like, what can we tangibly take away that helps us with that?
I think that it comes down to doing strategies like you just mentioned, about sort of questioning the stories that we might be telling ourselves about the way things are. I think a lot of times we get into patterns and we get into habits that feel as though it's always going to be this way. And so anytime that you are noticing, you are saying things like, I should do this. I should do this. Or we've always done it this way. I should do it this way. Should is your biggest red flag in the entire world. I hate this word because the shoulds are an indicator that maybe that's not aligned with you. So when you think about a mindset shift, one of the first things is to look out for is the shoulds. Are you saying I should do this? That's the first one. And the second one I like to think of is to another question. We're throwing out a lot of questions here, but that's okay. You'll have a lot to choose from. Another thing I like to think about when it comes to mindset shift is to ask yourself, what would my future self say? So if you say, I want more life, right? I want to work to live, not live to work, but you are still making choices that has work running your life, then your mindset's still not there yet. You're still in this mindset that says, I have to say yes to everything. I have to. And so asking yourself, what would my future self say, almost allows you to put it into a different perspective and say, well, much like you said, I am not going to enjoy spending all that time writing that book chapter to get a $200 book. And my future self will be like, why on earth did you agree to that? If that's the answer, then the decision you make is different. And so I think the mindset is almost allowing yourself to see things differently, which is super hard. I get it because you're busy every day and you're like, I don't have time to, do these kinds of things. But it can be as simple as asking yourself the questions you mentioned, Justine, and also just allowing yourself to think, how could this be different? And I think you're on the right track if you start to ask these questions and if you start to make different choices about how you spend your time and you start to feel slightly uncomfortable, you're on the right track. If you are uncomfortable about doing things that are right for you, it means you're just worried about letting other people down, but that's okay. Because like the professor who was so worried about saying no, do you know what everybody said to him when he turned them down? Okay, no problem. So know that you can make different choices. It might feel uncomfortable, but if it feels uncomfortable, you are probably doing what is right for you.
Love it. Thank you. Now, why is it important to look at the stories we tell ourselves with a critical eye, especially when it relates to work-life balance?
I think because you can just kind of get stuck, right? You can kind of get stuck with like, well, this is how it's always going to be. It's never going to change. And when we have that kind of mindset, we often don't take action that could make changes. So we don't think to ask, well, man, I'm just going to ask. I'm going to ask if we might be able to shift things around, or I'm going to ask if it could be this. So I think when anytime you're hearing the shoulds or you're hearing like that, it'll never change. I think that's a really good idea to question that, to gently question yourself and say, is that true? Who told me that? Because chances are no one did. You told yourself that. And there might be a different way forward if you can just think about it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I rarely do this and I should do it more, but if you are telling yourself your story in your head and your response is negative, I always think if you were talking to your best friend or your best friend was talking to you, would you give those same responses back? Right? And you wouldn't. So you should talk to yourself like you are actually your best friend, right? And give that good advice and stop being so negative or critical because we tend to do that, right? When we're reflecting inwards. Now, I know you had mentioned should is a red flag. Do you mind expanding on that a little bit more?
So should, I feel like, indicates that you don't really want to, but you're worried about letting people down, whoever that might be. It's usually not you. So when we're talking about something like work-life balance that is so inherently personal and different for every single one of us, if someone asks you for something to do more at work when you've already done so much, or to do it in a different way, or to take on something else, and you think, well, he's a good colleague and he's a good boss, and I probably should just do this for them. you don't want to. And I think that's what I mean by saying pay attention to the shoulds. If you don't want to, but you're adding it, there is no balance. You're just kind of adding to the work side of it, and the life side of it maybe starts to, come down a bit on the ledger. And that is important because that's what leads to resentment, stress, burnout.
Yeah, it's so hard. I will say my Myers-Briggs personality is usually very pro efficiency, but very lacking in empathy. And I
Mm,
remember in the veterinary field, in the beginning of my career, but this is way before I had kids, but I didn't realize how difficult it was to be a working parent until I had a kid. And I remember having to stay late with the interns to help them ventilate cases because all the other criticalists were leaving to pick up their kids from school or, bring them to soccer and feeling that resentment. Ugh, I'm the one who has to stay here till, 11. And it did affect my work-life balance, but it was also hard because I wasn't able to set those appropriate boundaries. And then once I realized being on the other side, how difficult it was to be able to balance it all as a working parent, it really made
mhm.
me empathetic. I always say
Yeah,
we're all at different stages, right? We're at different stages where you don't get it until it happens to you or your family member. So like the pain and the struggle of going through a family death or through, having to deal with elder care when your parents are getting
yeah,
older to going through a divorce, like until that happens to you, you're not empathetic to the demands of it. You're not empathetic towards the crazy scheduling of having to leave the clinic so you could run to an IVF appointment to get ultrasounded at 8 a.m., which nobody can do, right? So again, I always say in the vet field, the more we can be empathetic with each other while we're all setting our own boundaries, but the more empathetic we can be, the more compassionate we can be. It's really important just because we really want to support each other as we all struggle through this, right?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, really well said. We don't have to be alone with this. And I think that while it can be very, very scary to get vulnerable, just admitting or saying, you know, I just can't do this because I've done it the last 3 nights in a row. I really need to get rest. Now, I know that there's shortage in staff. I know that your boss might not be the most empathetic. I get it. But I do think there is value in asking for what you need, for saying it, taking that action rather than sitting, with the resentment.
Yeah, great, great point. Now, in a previous podcast, you and I talked about how we're very paper based, right? We still use
Yes.
paper journals and things like that. I know you advocate for stress diaries. Do you mind just talking about that?
Yes. Okay. So this is a technique that I think can actually be very helpful in pinpointing exactly what it is that is stressing you out. So we kind of say, oh, I'm so stressed. And it's this big, like vague bubble thing. So what I think can be helpful is to grab a piece of paper. If you don't want to, just grab the notes app on your phone, whatever works for you. But you want to keep track of what you are doing, say for like 1 or 2 days. I don't think you need to do this more than 3 days, unless tracking works for you. I don't know that you need more than that, but 3 days is a good, benchmark. What is happening on those days and where is your stress level? So, for example, this helps you identify the specific situations and scenarios that are leading to stress. So if you notice that on Monday mornings, when you have 4 Zoom calls back to back to back, you don't get to eat, you can't go to the bathroom, your legs hurt, and you are so just beyond by 12 p.m. Okay, well, now you know that back to back to back Zoom calls are stressing you out. And how could you take action to shift that around? Right. So it allows you to just get specific or, how is your schedule set up? And you'll know more about this, Justine, than I will about the way the scheduling works and when you might do records and when you might not. But if the flow of that, if you look at this and you're saying, oh my gosh, my stress spiked here because this was like that, it allows you to specifically address how you could make changes instead of saying like, I'm so stressed. I really need to sleep more and I need to go exercise more. It really allows you to isolate what's happening in your day to make changes if you can.
I love that. Thank you. Even being able to like, I might do this since I already have a daily journal or a daily calendar that I
Yeah.
use, just use like a 1 to 10 scale and write that down on the
Yep.
30-day outlook, just so I can track, where my stress level is.
Yeah.
Just because we want to do
It's a
everything
great
that we can to
idea.
mitigate it. Yeah,
You may also be surprised by what stresses you out and what doesn't. Because I did this recently and I was like, wow, you know, it's the kid pickup and then we're home and then it's this and it's that and it's that. And here I am thinking like, oh, I am so on top of this. But when I actually wrote it down, I thought, this routine makes me nuts. So I did. I just kind of tweaked it a little bit to give myself more breathing room in between. And well, it's a work in progress, shall we say, but we're getting there.
exactly. Everything in life is a work in progress. But the key thing is to give ourselves grace in that process. All right.
Yes.
Now, you and I both have busy schedules. Veterinary professionals also have busy schedules, getting to the clinic, rushing off, trying to, if you have kids, trying to do kid pickup, trying to get yourself a healthy meal, trying to
Right.
implement exercise into all of that. How can we in the veterinary profession integrate self-care into our daily routines despite our crazy schedules?
Great question. And I think adopting a philosophy of progress beats perfection is really important when it comes to this because setting boundaries is hard. It can feel like more work, which isn't great when you're already stressed out. So coming back to sort of this idea, this mindset shift of how could it be different, that can be one way to start. And rather than thinking of boundaries as something negative, thinking of it as something protective, like you are refueling and recharging to be better for your patients. If saying like, well, I can't possibly take 5 minutes, that's selfish. I hear that. I really do. Reframe it. So taking 5 minutes to breathe might actually make you a better provider when you walk in. It might help you connect more with the owner or even, the animal itself, those things, start to think of them as non-negotiable. So perhaps just like you put sanitizer on when you walk in and when you walk out, I'm going to stop, I'm going to breathe, and I'm going to walk into the room. Or I am going to wait 2 hours before I respond to a request for my time and for my energy. Or will this bring me joy? What would my future self say? So these are all little things that you can do throughout your day that can add up to feeling differently, feeling better.
Love it. Thank you so much. Again, setting boundaries is so hard, but I do think it's crucial for us to be able to
Mhm.
do. And again, I love that even just taking a deep breath, taking that time to sigh, to breathe, to be mindful, to like use all our five senses. And then one little clue that I like to ask myself is, well, two things. One is this going to matter in 5 minutes or 5 weeks, 5 years? No, it's not. Right. And I just learned this one actually from my pastor, where he uses the acronym POT, people over tasks. I'm very task oriented. And so I want to slay my to-do list, but I do it at the expense of relationships, of talking to my husband or taking the time to just have a kind conversation. And so I'm going to use that acronym more POT, people over tasks, because I don't prioritize that as much as getting things off my to-do list. And sometimes it's more important to take that 5 minutes to build that relationship. Now, what activities or habits do you recommend for professionals who need to disconnect from work and really
Mm.
truly focus on their personal well-being when they don't feel like they have the time?
Okay, so this is a great question, and it will be really unique and individual to you. But what I suggest as a place to start is to find a hobby. And I know you might be laughing and thinking, like, oh my gosh, you're joking, but I'm not really. And if you're like, I have no idea what my hobby would be, think about what you like to do as a kid where you would lose track of time. You could just lose yourself in that activity. I had one client, for him, it was art. He loved drawing. And at some point, someone told him that it was a waste of time. and he stopped. And in our work together, this came up. We talked about it. He went out and bought some, pencils and some paper. He was drawing and he said it was some of the most relaxing time that was so restorative for the rest of his week. So that can be one way to think about it. The other way to think about it is, similar to the losing track of time, but what activities do you notice that you want to keep doing? So for some people, this is reading books, like fiction, maybe. For me, it's being outside with my plants. So if I'm outside weeding, watering, I mean, I could be out there forever. I don't know what time it is. I'm just doing stuff. I love it. And even if I only do it for 10 minutes, I still feel really good. So it's kind of finding those things. And if you're like, I don't have that, I would say go back to what you do as a kid, ask your mom and dad. If you don't remember, ask your mom and dad. And if you still don't have an idea, just start experimenting. There's no right or wrong. No one's going to give you an F because you tried calligraphy and you hated it. You know what I mean? Allow yourself and maybe have some fun with failing forward, right? So calligraphy didn't work. Try axe throwing. Axe throwing didn't work. Try reading. Something simple, but you get the gist. Like burnout makes things feel serious and hard. Bring back a little spark of joy, to your points. Bring back a little spark of happy. What makes you just kind of giggle? Like what makes you just grin? Those are the things that you can start with to build some momentum, I think.
I love it. I know all you veterinary technicians out there have lots of hobbies and side hustles. Some of my favorite hobbies that some of my veterinary colleagues who are vet techs, specifically in our VETgirl team, do include fitness. One is really into working out. One is really into making body products. So like lotions and candles and shea butter creams. One's really into photography. So I think it's so important to have non-veterinary hobbies. I didn't play any sports till I was 30. I was too busy nerding out to get into vet school. And I hated running. I just wasn't physically active. I didn't have a lot of experience with it. And, started running probably at 30, 35. And it ended up being a really great way for me to get that movement and relieve a lot of stress. So there's always time to pick up new hobbies.
Yes. A friend of mine just started crocheting. So she has found these kits and these YouTube videos, or no, needle pointing. Well, crocheting works too. It's all kind of, it's all in the same wheelhouse. Needle point. She loves it. She will sit at the end of the day, do a little bit of this. I also, was talking with a friend who's also a health coach about this recently and about people who are in thinking fields. So who have to think a lot, which I think a lot of veterinarians, vet techs, right? Like you're constantly thinking. We need hobbies that allow us to work with our hands because it shuts off our minds. So when I'm in the garden, I'm not thinking. I'm just pulling weeds out. Or when she's needle pointing, she's not thinking. She's just using her hands. And I think that is a point so well taken because if you can shut off your brain for a second, you can find calm and clarity that allows new ideas and energy to come forward.
I love that. Thank you so much. One funny thing that I just wanted to leave with our audience is I remember when my son he had just turned 3 and I was on the floor with him in the morning coloring. And he said to me, and I realized, kids say so much, they talk the way you do. And he said to me, less talking, more coloring. I was like, whoa. So take the time to enjoy whatever you're doing.
Absolutely. Be present.
Exactly. Be present. That's what he's trying to tell me. And I just didn't pick up on it. Emily, I just want to thank you so much. Fantastic information. Love what you do as a life coach. Where can people find more information about your website and about what you do?
Sure. I would love to connect with you if you're open to it. So I'm on Instagram, Emily Riemer Coaching. I'm also on LinkedIn. And then you can head to my website, emilyreamercoaching.com. And I have some free resources there that can help you begin to start to address burnout. If you ever want to chat, please just set up a call. No strings attached. Like, let's just talk. You're not alone. And I think that's why these conversations are so important because we can talk about it we can bring it out there and let people know that you are normal, you are human, and there is a way forward.
I'm going to fully disclose. I'm such an advocate for people to implement and use life coaches. I found it very instrumental. And most of us veterinarians were like, I'm too cheap to do that. I'll just read about it. But I can't advocate for it more. It helped me a ton. And just want to thank you for all that you do.
Good. I'm so glad to hear that. Well, thank you for having me. This has been fantastic.
Thank you so much. And hope to see you on a future VETgirl podcast.
I would love it anytime.